welcome to another edition of the Sportsway podcast. I am your host, Tom Bassam. This week, we have a couple of my esteemed colleagues in the studio. Josh, how are you?
Good, Tom. How are you?
And Steve McCaskill, our technology editor. How are you?
Very well, Tom. Thank you.
A little bit later on, I will be chatting to Ed Abis, who is the CEO of Dizplai, to talk a little bit about their progression as a business and his leadership of their change in that direction. So check out that in part 2 of this podcast. But first, gents, I wanted to just kind of rattle through a few of the kind of big industry news lines from the past week or so. It's going to be a little bit football focused, but not football focus, unfortunately. Hopefully people get that reference. But one of the places I really wanted to start was Manchester United, a club close to your heart, Steve, which is a club that's looking kind of quite different from how it was 6 months ago. Obviously, we've had the takeover of Sir Jim Ratcliffe. But in the last week or so, we've had some really interesting, sort of less positive news, I would say, about the club. Perhaps you could kind of run us through what's going on at Old Trafford right now.
Obviously, Jim Ratcliffe has come in as minority owner. He spent a lot of money through Ineos on getting that stake, and he's trying to transform within his remit as sole controller of football operations, trying to transform the club. That's been through change the backroom staff, so new director of football, new people coming dealing with recruitment. In the past week, there have been some, I guess, less positive headline-friendly stories. You know, Jim Ratcliffe is investing, I think it's about £50 million in overhauling the training facilities. But it appears that the women's team are going to be collateral damage in that while the training ground is being refurbished, facilities built for the women's team will be used by the men's first team, and the women's team will have to use temporary facilities. So essentially, I guess, porta cabins almost. And the optics of that aren't great, not least because few people have much confidence that Jim Ratcliffe is interested in the women's side right now. His focus is entirely on the men's first team. The women's team won the FA Cup 2 months ago now. Jim Ratcliffe went to the men's FA Cup final but didn't go to the women's final. We've just seen Mary Earps leave for Paris Saint-Germain. There have been some reports that agents are saying it's not a good time to join Manchester United. And then even before Ratcliffe joined, there were some other key departures, Alessia Russo, Lauren James. So it appears that a lot of the good work being done on the women's side is perhaps coming undone a little bit because the focus of Ratcliffe is on repairing the men's team. Beyond that, Jim Ratcliffe is a very successful businessman. That goes without saying. He probably knows more about this than I ever will. But he's of a certain vintage in that he doesn't believe in work from home. He's looking to make redundancies, which does seem a bit egregious given the size of the contracts that many of the men's team do have. And there's been talk about the new stadium. Of course, Jim Ratcliffe's been seeking some public money for part of that, the renovation or rebuild, which again, for a club that generates that much revenue, does seem a bit strange, although he's talking about wider regeneration of that part of the city. And then we're talking about naming rights of that. So it could be that if Old Trafford is renovated, it'll be similar, I guess, to Sports Direct at St James's Park or something like that. But if it is a complete stadium rebuild, it could be something entirely different. I don't know if it will be Ineos Stadium or something like that. But all this has been done without much consultation with the fans. And I think that's putting a lot of people off. I think a lot of supporters were happy that Ratcliffe got involved. There was a need for this kick up the backside, so to speak, after years of off-field neglect, which has now led to on-field problems. But I don't know if this is going to endear him to the fans. There's been an implication that if fans aren't on board with these, things like the naming rights, then it could lead to ticket price increases, which have, season tickets have gone up the last couple of seasons. And again, that's just, for a club that has enough of the revenues that Manchester United does, just seems a bit off. So yeah, I think the optics are terrible. They're not necessarily the most fan-friendly changes. And I'm not sure if Jim Ratcliffe really cares, but it is sort of negative headlines around what should be some positive change for the team.
Yeah, I think that's kind of it. I think Jim Ratcliffe would argue that the changes he's undertaking are necessary. He'd also probably argue that the main focus of the club is the men's first team, which everyone can argue the merits of that approach, but undeniably that is where the most of the revenue comes from. And that actually Manchester United for a long time has it's obviously just let itself fall into, if not decline, then certainly stagnation when it comes to the operations of its stadium. We've all seen the big famous Old Trafford waterfall. But at the same time, he's sort of come in and it's gone from talking about, I think, being an owner who viewed himself as a custodian of a local community asset. And I don't know if those are exactly the words he used, but that was definitely the kind of implication when he joined the club, to becoming, someone more just kind of willing and way more kind of inclined to just dictate on his own terms. Now, Josh, from your perspective, do you think that this is the sort of just the work of a disruptor, who's someone who's coming in to make a bold change at somewhere that needs a change, or do you think perhaps there are other ways to do this?
It's interesting sort of characterizing him as a disruptor, given that we know, well, there's been a lot of reports saying that he's been in favor of the Premier League keeping sort of the status quo in terms of spending rules. He's not in favor of or he made it clear in an interview with Bloomberg that he's not a fan of the sort of spending cap trial that's going to take place in England's top flight. And in a sense, he certainly wants to keep the status quo. And, you know, in some ways, I guess he will be a disruptor, and given that he wants to sort of transform his local sort of boyhood team into sort of a fully fledged sort of commercial entity. But in another sense, his interest is keeping United at the top and ensuring that they remain sort of the top dog of English football. So in some ways, he might be interpreted as a disruptor, but in some ways, he isn't. He wants the status quo to continue. And obviously, you've seen how much the Glazers have profited since sort of taking over United, and I'm sure he wants something similar. So it's interesting in terms of whether he wants change. I mean, I'm sure he wants to transform the club commercially, but whether he wants change for the ecosystem as a whole remains to sort of be seen, you know, particularly as United sort of continue to sort of rebuild relationships with fans who have been a bit disillusioned with the old Glazer tenure. It remains to be seen whether he'll truly represent change from that. He is change from the Glazers, but whether what he's pushing for might lead to the same outcome or whether it'll be truly different, I'm not entirely sure.
I guess to me, though, it seems like, while he has a minority holding, I think what's like 29% currently. He seems to have a very outsized influence for someone in that position, right? Like, it was initially reported that he was taking control of the football operations. Now he seems to be making the running on the stadium and also changing the commercial operations, which was the bit of the club that was actually relatively successful, right? And not just that, but some pretty senior, high-profile figures have left the club in the last couple of months. Steve, to me, it just seems like I don't think really what we're getting here is the full picture of the level of control that Ratcliffe has there.
It exposes what I guess a strange structure that this is, in that Jim Ratcliffe has paid $1.4 billion for the rights to operate a football club on behalf of the Glazers, who still get their dividends and service the debt as a result of their leverage buyout in 2005. But it's almost as though there is a pact in place whereby Ratcliffe makes these changes. The Glazers benefit from this in the whatever term they desire, and then will eventually have an exit strategy. I'm wondering if that's it. I'm not necessarily United need disruption. I think they just need to get back to being a well-run operation that has football at the heart of what it does, acknowledging the fact that if the team does well, the team is going to also do well commercially. And if you're going to give the Glazers some credit, they have completely transformed the commercial operations of that club. They've set blueprints for other teams to follow. I don't think that much is in doubt. But ultimately, it's a football club. It's not an ATM machine. And I think that's sort of where we're getting to. I mean, I think at some point we could see some friction between the Glazers and Ratcliffe if they continue with this structure in terms of what Ratcliffe wants to do, given his, as you say, he's a minority shareholder, but he has a huge influence, and whether that aligns with the Glazers, who still have, I guess, on paper, the controlling stake in the team. So yeah, I'm a little bit surprised it has gone beyond pure football operations. But then I guess you know, we work at Sports Pro. You could argue that it's sometimes quite difficult to separate the two.
100%. Interesting, actually, that this kind of comes out, and then today big report in The Athletic from Adam Crofton, who does some very good reporting around the club, basically kind of profiling this new partnership that they have with Snapdragon, which was, I think, previously announced, if not now just confirmed, but probably profiled as a result of the new kit coming out. That's said to be worth $75 million a year, with, I think, an option to extend beyond the initial 3 years agreement, according to the report in The Athletic. Interestingly, that was secured by Victoria Timpson, who is the outgoing CEO of Alliances and Partnerships for Manchester United. She's left alongside, in the last few months, Richard Arnold, their Chief Financial Officer, Patrick Stewart, Chief Financial Officer, Cliff Batty, the Chief Communications and Marketing executive, Ellie Norman, and the football director, John Murtagh. So, of those decisions, you'd really only think that Ratcliffe has a role to play in one of them, which would be Murtagh. But instead, you've got a lot of new faces coming in.
Yeah, as you say, I think it's difficult to separate the two. There's also a natural, I guess, end of the site, in terms of whether they want to be part of that new structure, if Ratcliffe's kind of ideas of how he wants to run the business. We've seen, if we're going to give Ratcliffe some credit, I think his footballing appointments have been widely regarded as good ones. Again, we don't have as much awareness of the market for other senior executives, but lots of changeover. As I said, I wouldn't be surprised if there is that sort of tacit agreement that Ratcliffe will get control of everything, or he's perhaps spoken to the Glazers that he believes he can overhaul it if he goes beyond the initial remit. I mean, one of the reasons that the previous chief executive Ed Woodward was in place was he was essentially the accountant that helped broker the deal to acquire the club. So that was the source of the Glazers' knowledge of the local market. So perhaps they trust Ratcliffe, believe that they're willing to take on his advice just because they've worked with him and they trust his decision making.
Seas of change at Old Trafford, but I definitely don't think this is going to be the last time we talk about this in 2024. More to come, I think, on Jim Ratcliffe's ongoing revolution in Manchester. The next subject I wanted to hit was what's going on with Ligue 1 right now. I know we're in the midst of an international tournament, but this is getting quite serious for Ligue 1. There's still no broadcast deal in place. That expired at the end of last season. That was with Amazon. There was a few different sub-licensing bits which saw DAZN air games and Canal Plus hold contracts, and maybe beIN were involved in some way. I'm slightly confused by how that all worked come the end of that agreement. But yeah, Josh, I'll come to you first on this. What's the latest reporting on what's happening with Ligue 1 right now?
So it's still, it feels now like negotiations have become more public, or more things are sort of coming out to the public in terms of the broadcast negotiations. But essentially there was a meeting, I think, with clubs and with CBC, where Ligue 1 and their sort of media department presented this contingency plan to create a domestic direct consumer streaming service to broadcast games in the scenario that they don't secure a rights deal. They are suggesting that the service could attract 2 million subscribers in its first year, and that it could make an average of 578 million euros per season in terms of income from not only subscription revenue, but also advertising revenue and other revenue that the service sort of generates. That is billed as a contingency plan. The league, we know, is still, or are believed to still be in talks with, the whole cast of broadcasters in the French sort of sports landscape, be it Amazon, beIN, Canal Plus, and DAZN. So, who knows whether this sort of DTC service comes into play or not. Another interesting development was that beIN have secured the rights to every Ligue 2 game in France. So whether, that's a sign that beIN sort of willing to get into business further with LFP, or whether they haven't fully shut the door, that remains to be seen. But yeah, as you said, it still remains very sort of cloudy in terms of the financial and Ligue 1 clubs, I'm sure, when trying to sort of do sort of their budgets and sort of figure out how much they have to spend over the summer to improve their teams, I'm sure that they are anticipating sort of a slash in revenue. And yeah, it remains a pretty murky scenario at the moment.
Yeah, what are we now? A couple of months away from the season starting, 6 weeks, something like that? Probably even less, actually. Steve, I think you've probably seen this dance done before by a few different leagues when it comes to threatening to do to go D2C rather than agreeing a broadcast deal. Do you believe that this is actually what the LFP wants to do?
No, I don't believe this is what they want to do. It's some of the internal projections in terms of subscribers. I think it's 2 million subscribers. In terms of revenue targets, whether that's through subscriptions or advertising, have been leaked either intentionally or unintentionally by various parties. They're seen as quite optimistic. The one thing I would say in their favour is that the French pay TV market, I'm not going to be too technical, but it's IPTV based mainly. So over the internet, there is a way for them to get into homes, but they're not going to have the marketing of a major broadcaster. They're not going to have the guaranteed revenues. And right now, I think the clubs just want certainty. They have no idea how much money they're getting for the next season. Never mind the ones after. So they, with the transfer windows open, they can't make informed decisions about recruitment and contract negotiations. And it all comes down to the LFP sort of still paying the price for the deal they signed with MediaPro three years ago, which gave them, I think it must be like a billion euros, which I think they initially wanted with this new cycle to try and close the gap with the other leagues. I'm led to believe that target's kind of been abandoned now, in that they're now seeking something at least on par with the renegotiated deals that they have with Amazon and beIN, who sub-license their games to Canal Plus. But of course, Canal Plus have been upset with the whole thing. So it's all sort of coming to a head. I don't think they want to go D2C at all. It's a negotiating tactic. It's quite remarkable that, as you say, we're weeks before the start of the season and there's nothing in place for fans. Clubs have no idea what they're doing. And I know we see a lot of people saying, this is a great opportunity to go DTC, prove that the model works. That's not really how elite level football works. Elite level football, the growth of that has been based on predictable television income, that clubs know what they have, know what they're doing, and then the burden of risk is shifted from the league to the broadcasters. I don't think they'd want to do this, especially not with this time frame.
In a funny way, we've seen the D2C approach before in France, when MediaPro took over as the main broadcaster, and obviously that deal collapsed. But one of the reasons that deal collapsed was because MediaPro couldn't get a carriage contract for Telefoot, the channel that was carrying all the Ligue 1 games, with Canal Plus. They're relying on streaming as well at a time when streaming had much less sort of penetration into the French market than even it does now. And that's thanks to Amazon essentially kind of pulling Liga along. We've never heard much about the kind of success or not of what Amazon did with that partnership, and whether or not it was able to pull in the viewers. The fact that it's not immediately signed up for a big extension suggests perhaps it didn't quite hit the mark it wanted to. We don't know. Like that's pure speculation. But if you are going to go full D2C, it would have made sense to do this and announce it months and months ago, so you can actually have a marketing campaign in place, right?
Oh yeah, you could trail it this season before. You'd be able to, you'd have sponsorship boards at games, depending on the contractual obligations. You get it in the mind of the fans. The fans know where they're going to be able to get it from next season. So you'd have that long sign up lead. You need to test tech as well. We've seen the problems that DAZN had in Italy when they won the rights. It's not as simple as people think. It's all very well thinking, there are certain former Premier League chairmen who go on TalkSport saying that we should do Prem Flicks, because you cut out the middleman. That's not how these things work, really.
No, it's definitely a lot more complex than just the push of a button. Josh, did you have some further thoughts?
The elephant in the room is, what does CVC think of all this, right? Because they bought a stake in the media and the commercial company to get a return in the commercial revenue that Ligue 1 was going to generate going forward. And it feels as though if you're and you only invest in a league that you see either steady or growing returns, right? What does it say about sort of a league having a private equity fund come involved, and sort of that does CVC now sort of doubt the investment in the LFP? Do they sort of scale it back? What does that mean? And I guess that's the risk of selling a stake to a private equity firms, that they will take a share of whatever revenue it is, and it looks like it's a dwindling revenue pot. And also, what does it say about, CVC could easily sort of pull the plug, and then where does that leave French football? That's the greater danger in all this, in terms of the struggle for media rights revenue. That was always
what was talked about at the time when any of those deals were done. Was like, this isn't charity. They're not just giving you money. They are going to want this back at some point. And what that means, and you're 100% right, and it's probably been overlooked in this whole conversation, is that even when a deal is agreed, the clubs are actually going to get a reduced portion of money, which, as Steve said, could potentially be the same or less than they were getting last time round. So really what they've signed up for is to have a nice cash injection up front, but at the end of it come out getting lower annual returns, which football clubs, as you said, Steve, they're all about predicted revenue, predicted cash flows, being able to make sure that they can kind of fund that. Bringing this sort of back to where we are now in the midst of a European tournament, absolutely incredible, really, that the French national team continues to perform and produce players in the way that it does when its domestic league is so bad. But then I guess you'd say, well, England have a fantastic Premier League, but their national team sucks. So they might be unrelated. But that is the pitch of the LFP, was that this is where stars are born. And it will continue to be where stars are born, because they will always be moving on to other leagues if the clubs don't have enough money to pay for them. Right, one last football subject I wanted to go through was a story that broke. Bloomberg's been very busy recently with this stuff. Broke last week, right at the end of it, and this was that FIFA is seeking a big investment in its own OTT service. Steve McCaskill, this sounds like something that's right up your street. Can you talk us through it?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's any organisation in the world, never mind sport, that has such an inflated idea of how much revenue it can generate from certain activities. FIFA Plus is one of the best things that FIFA has done in recent years. It's a really good service, really good platform, and I think it's a really clever strategy. I have no idea how you can raise up to 2 billion. The reports there between 1 and 2 billion for the expansion of a streaming service. I don't know where that goes. I've been trying to think about how that money could be raised. Is it through giving member associations better equipment? Is it through marketing? Sure. I'm not sure how you can actually spend that amount of money for what they are reported to be interested in doing. The only thing I could think of was that it's to acquire rights. And could that be the Club World Cup, given that FIFA reportedly wanted $4 billion for the rights to the expanded Club World Cup, is reportedly been in talks with Apple about the global streaming rights to that event. Apple is said to be prepared to pay $1 billion for that, which in itself seems like quite a lot of money for a tournament that we still don't know a lot about, still 12 months out. So it wants to expand FIFA Plus. To give some defense to FIFA, this is a report, so I wouldn't expect them to say what the money would be used for until it says so officially, but it's believed to have enlisted the support of UBS. But it's a case of, we've seen this before in terms of its expectations for the FIFA Women's World Cup and the rights it wanted to get from that. We've seen it with the split with EA Sports, and it was understood to have wanted to double its license fee for intellectual property. It didn't really add much to the game. And I think most people consider that to be a misstep again. So the difference between expectations and reality is quite serious. But the expansion of FIFA Plus is ostensibly a good thing. It's been a really good initiative. There's lots of things. I just don't see how, unless they're thinking that they can grow it as a business, and again, similar to what we're talking about private equity, taking stakes and taking a share of that. So yeah, looking to raise money, want to expand FIFA Plus. We don't really know how or why.
That was interesting. It wasn't mentioned in that report, unless I missed it. This wasn't linked to the Club World Cup rights, because as you said, it's the only thing that really makes sense. Yes, you could spend an extra 2 billion marketing FIFA Plus, but like for what benefit really? It's already shown live sports. It's carried the World Cup, I think, in Brazil previously. It obviously carries a hell of a lot of live games from like minor competitions and leagues. If you want to watch like the domestic top flight in the Gambia, I think you can get it on FIFA Plus, which is great. Like, that's really great for FIFA's mission, which is growing the game worldwide and growing exposure for its member associations. That is what it's for. It could invest in some more tech for that, I guess. Maybe it wants to beef up like what that looks like. If it's raising more money for FIFA Plus, I don't think that's money that it's then going to just transfer into facilities on the ground for its members. So for me, then it is the rights thing. It is the Club World Cup. Like, as you said, like, Apple's kind of not shown the interest perhaps that they wanted to, at least financially. No one knows what that tournament looks like yet. Worldwide rights, if FIFA could pay itself, doing a Todd Bowley, that maybe that's the move, Josh.
It just feels silly. This feels like a really farcical situation in which they've promised clubs a certain amount of money, gone to market, realized they can't make it up, and so have gone, okay, we'll buy the rights ourselves that then we give back to. It just feels like a process with unnecessary steps. Like, I don't know, like I don't know how many people were clamoring for an expansion of the Club World Cup to begin with. So to have that confidence that a broadcaster was going to stump up X amount of money when there's so little details that we know about that tournament, like we know which teams have qualified, we know it's going to be held in the US, and that's about it. It feels as though they've sort of taken a pitch like that's not been fully fleshed out to market and sort of have been met with a very muted response, and are now trying to figure out how can we sort of go back to clubs and say, hey, but it's okay, we'll still make you your money somehow. Who knows what's going on in the background, but it feels like a very farcical situation all around.
I would like to re-emphasize at this point that this is a report. We don't know if this is true. We are making a lot of inference ourselves, but it could be that, look, if it decides it is able to offer the platform, it's able to give the clubs the guarantees of the money to participate, it can make a success of this. Once it has the broadcaster in place, it can get the sponsors on board, because I think this, partners are going to be skeptical of committing to something until they know how it's going to be broadcast to the end user, because they want that visibility. So I think, as we've all said, if it's a question of rights, it's more understandable. If it's just expanding a streaming platform, I'm not sure how it all adds up.
For sure. One thing we do know is that this is actually part of FIFA Plus, right? Or a part of FIFA Plus. One of the things that FIFA Plus shows has been FIFA's esports events and esports tournaments. Now, you've already mentioned, Steve, the termination, the exit, the cancellation, however we want to frame it, at the end of that relationship with EA. There's been reports that FIFA has been going to 2K, who is EA's kind of big rival in the sports video title space, about potentially looking at that. There's been a couple of announcements on partnerships we do know about. What are they in that gaming space?
Yes, I'm going to give FIFA some more praise. We can. I actually think they're doing some really interesting things in this space now. I think, I said it before, the EA move was a misstep in terms of direct revenue, but we're finally sort of seeing an evolution of FIFA's own gaming strategy and perhaps the freedoms it now has now it's out of that deal. So it is holding an official Rocket League tournament as part of its, I think it's a FIFA World Cup brand that's going to be taking place. I'm not sure if they are going to have a football themed World Cup anytime soon in terms of the esports space, but it's going to fill the FIFA void for a bit. It's a good move. Rocket League has a developed esports space. It's really easy to pick up. It's basically car football. That's the easiest way to describe Rocket League. It's going to appeal to a much wider audience. Rocket League's done other partnerships with other properties. So I think it's a really good move. It's going to tap into an audience that is entirely different, really clever. The move with Sports Interactive for I can't remember the name of the official title, but it's effectively Football Manager World Cup. That's a really good move. Football Manager's been talking about expanding it, becoming an esport perhaps in its own right. And this will allow it to do that. FIFA gets to tap into a really committed group of football fans, people who play Football Manager. It's a very different group to those that might play FIFA or another football game. And it's been linked with a licensing deal with, as you say, with 2K Sports to bring the FIFA game back, not to shelves, that's showing my age, back to digital marketplaces. And, we did hear Gianni Infantino at the time of the EA deal saying there'll only be one true game, FIFA, it'll be the best. That remains to be seen. EA's got decades-long head start in this space, but if there is one company that has the development and marketing might to make this happen, it is 2K, which is basically part of the same company that has Grand Theft Auto, which is phenomenally successful. It's got very, very deep pockets. So yeah, I think it's been making some really good moves. I think it's doing some really good work. It's diversifying its offering. And again, it's all part about FIFA's mission to get closer to the consumer. Its D2C strategy isn't just FIFA Plus, it's gaming, it's digital collectibles. It wants to have that close relationship with the consumer and engage them that way.
Yeah, like you said, FIFA Plus is actually a pretty good product and has been a pretty big success for FIFA. It's just what happens to it next and why it needs to develop in the way it needs to develop. And my sense on this is that Gianni Infantino's ego is taking over, and that man's ego knows no bounds. So how that plays out will be certainly one thing we're going to be tracking in the next few months at Sports Pro. One thing that I think everyone is tracking right now, although maybe a little bit less than they are usually, is Wimbledon. My favourite tennis major. Steve, you're a local resident. Oh, Josh, you probably just prefer the Australian Open, don't you? He's shaking his head. That's good. But Wimbledon, as we've discussed, I think, previously on this podcast, Steve, event organisers that are very prepared to, whilst celebrating the traditions of the tournament itself, grass courts, strawberries and cream, etc., are not afraid to go in search of innovation. They have a long-standing relationship with IBM. What's the latest step in this innovation? I've got a feeling it's going to be a 2-letter update here.
So yes, I had the opportunity to go down to the England Club the other week. You do mention I'm relatively local. It's always great to go to something I can walk to. Wimbledon Hill does do me in these days. It's really a depressing fact that. But yes, you're right. AI is the buzzword for this year, as it is for many other sporting events. Wimbledon's been using AI for several years, back when IBM used to call it something called cognitive computing, which was its own term for it, but it's decided to go with the industry vernacular now. And Wimbledon's used AI for its data analytics in terms of creating insights for its digital platforms that will help fans understand the game. It has something called, I think it's keys to the game, which are 3 data-driven metrics, which if happen, have a really good chance of leading to a certain result. So we've just learned today that Andy Murray isn't going to be competing in the singles, but if Andy Murray's game today, they're putting 3 metrics that have said if Andy Murray does these 3 things, he has a really good chance of winning, whether it's a percentage first serves or return winners or things like that. It's used AI for video highlights, so it uses everything from those data sources, crowd noise, computer vision to pack as much action as possible into a 1 minute clip. And then it's been working on generative AI, which is the source of this buzz within the industry and beyond. Last year, it used generative AI to create spoken word commentary for highlights. And this year, it's using the same technology to create catch-up summaries for people who want to find out what happened at Wimbledon while they've been at work, personalized catch-up summaries. So it's using Gen AI to create these. And one thing was very keen to stress when I was down there was that, this isn't replacing their content team. It's not instead of writers, commentators, video editors. It's just allowing them to do more than what would be possible, with manual methods alone. There's 18 courts, I think, at Wimbledon. There's singles, there's doubles, there's juniors, there's wheelchair tennis, senior competitions. It's quite a logistical task, especially for a tournament that is 2 weeks. So in terms of scaling, some things it can scale up, some things it can't. So it says that this is what it wants to do: is to do more with less, do more with the same number of resources because it's not cutting them, do things that will be possible with manual methods. So yeah, that's the big innovation this year. It's not surprising at all that a company the size of IBM is helping a sports property with the profile Wimbledon has do interesting things.
It seems to me that this is where we've reached with AI right now. It's content creation, it's personalization, it's fan engagement stuff, really. It's similar to things we've seen with the Tour de France at the moment. They've got a nice digital helper. I can't remember what it's called. Eleanor, our colleague's done a really nice video on this if you want to go check it out on our Instagram, but explaining what the Tour de France are using their generative AI stuff for. I think we're going to see it at the Open as well. Josh, is this to you is this what you were expecting from AI? Or are you sort of thinking, I want something else from this? Are we sort of tapping on the glass ceiling right now with what AI can do?
I think given the amount of hive mind Hollywood sci-fi movies out there, it would be reasonable to sort of think that there was going to be some big grand scale changes to come. But I actually really like how Wimbledon are using it. Coverage for wheelchair events and sort of events that wouldn't get the same necessary shine, given, you can't sort of, I don't know if you have enough manpower to sort of send to every single event and every single game. And then obviously, as you've alluded to, sort of optimizing content creation and sort of allowing Wimbledon to sort of, provide content for your TikTok users, small videos, your Instagram sort of a carousel of photos. Like you can sort of do so many different sort of things. So I really like how it's being used. It seems to sort of allow the tournament to sort of think about their audience and how people consume content and adapt to each sort of demographics of needs. So I think, this, it's to me sort of the one of the better, most optimal ways sporting properties can use AI, and it doesn't feel like we're not at sort of a hologram artist sort of level where it feels super controversial. I feel like it's at a good, understandable level that sort of seems to benefit the viewer experience, the fan experience, and the tournament as well in terms of reaching audiences. So I feel like this is one of the better, if not the best, uses of it so far that we've seen in the sporting world.
You did our Tech Stack article on the Euros recently, Josh. Were you surprised that there was sort of slightly less focus from AI on that? Is this why you're impressed with what Wimbledon are doing?
I think I'm impressed given that Wimbledon has, I guess the Wimbledon has so many different sort of tournaments going on, as sort of Steve alluded to. You have, men's singles, women's singles, doubles, wheelchair, juniors. So I think it's used in a way that it allows to provide that sort of 360 coverage of it. Whereas the Euros, obviously, it's at max 3 games a day. Now it's 2 games a day. Like, it's very easy to sort of have people sort of cover those games and tournaments without needing to resort to AI too much. So given that technology and football seem to be intertwined in causing outrage amongst fans at the moment, I wouldn't have imagined UEFA sort of making like a big announcement saying we're using AI to sort of help us do VAR or something like that. Although we've seen how the connected board, they've obviously put all their eggs in the connected board technology at the moment for offsides, and that seems to have, for the most part, done pretty well. So I think with the way Wimbledon are using it at the moment, it's a really good way. And whether UEFA and other bodies follow their footsteps. I'm sure they're watching with a keen eye.
Yeah, AI Howard Webb is maybe something that we all need or not. Steve, you write about this space quite a lot. I kind of want to broaden it just outside of Wimbledon at the moment. Do you think that expectations in the sports industry about what AI can do are too high, or are they about right?
I think they're too high. I think society is too high. I think the conversations about ethics, well, incredibly important, and they do need to be discussed now. I think perhaps they may have given a misguided idea of what AI is capable of doing right now. But those are issues that need to be ironed out. There's privacy, there's legal issues that need to be discussed. But AI has been around for a long time in more primitive forms. Generative AI is now happening because of the work that's been done on creating things like ChatGPT and other tools. It's not going to solve everyone's issues overnight. I think it's going to be a case of gradual introduction, gradual development, using proven use cases. So in areas where there's lots of data, whether structured or unstructured, like recruitment, obviously that's going to be a use case. Things like what Wimbledon are doing, I think are really good. Semi-automated offsides that we've seen at the Euros, really good idea. Tennis, there could be line calling soon. That's done through computer vision, so that's a technology that's already fairly developed. One thing I did ask, and this is one thing that's going to be a big milestone for me, is when you get a version of something like ChatGPT and you can say, I want to see all tackles made by Wes Brown in the last 10 years, and it can come back with that highlights package done for you, and you have that degree of personalized viewing, that's going to be a real game changer. But with several, I didn't say the words Wes Brown to IBM and Wimbledon, but I did ask, how far away do you think we are of you saying, I want to see single-handed backhands, that's a shot that's dying out in tennis. I want to see every single one from the tournament, and I want to see in 1 minute. That's something I would like to see. So yes, I think expectations are high. I think that's being driven by certain companies wanting to get involved in the sports industry as well. There's a degree of AI washing, so masquerading technologies that are not AI or are a different type of AI and branding them as generative AI. I think that's heightening things. So look, there's going to be lots of interesting use cases. We're going to get there, but expectations are stratospheric at the minute. It needs to be toned down.
Well, all right. That's the expert view from our technology editor, Steve McCaskill, and we will have more from him and more from Josh in future episodes of the Sports Podcast for sure. For now, I'm going to swing over to a conversation that I had with Ed Abis, who is the CEO of Dizplai. Dizplai are a partner of ours, and we've worked with them at a number of events, but they've been on a really interesting transformation as a business in the last couple of years. And I wanted to ask Ed all about what it's been like leading that and what it's been like as the CEO of a company that's undertaken such great change. So here's my conversation with Ed. Ed Abis, welcome to the Sports Pro podcast. You're the CEO of Dizplai, a partner of ours that we've been working with for a little while now. Been around at a few Sports Pro lives. This is an opportunity for you and for our listeners really to learn a little bit more about Dizplai and what you guys do. Perhaps if we could start with the sort of the backstory of the business and your involvement with it, and bring us up to speed on Dizplai.
Hi Tom, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a long journey for the business. And very much transformed over the last couple of years, I would say. We were formerly known as something else, and we rebranded as Dizplai just over 2 years ago now. The business, if we were to try and sort of sum up what we are, we exist to transform passive audiences into engaged communities. We've got a very diverse background of people within the business, and I think that's all come together in terms of that melting pot of people within the organisation in terms of why we exist to do what we do. We started out back in the days of, SMS being the only way that anyone can interact with anything, quite frankly. And then also the world has changed very much. And then social media came along, been around with the sort of second screen eras. But we've got to the point now where ultimately, how do we get an audience in some way, shape or form to interact with a live experience in some way, shape or form? And we've got a multitude of examples how we do that. So we work with the likes of you guys around your events. So we've been doing a bit of work there. We're working with Mark Aldridge on the United Stand, and that's football. And we very much helped him to not only integrate the audience-generated content, as I like to call it, into his live experiences, but also the overall look and feel of that experience that he's creating. So it looks high-end. So brands sponsors who want to be a part of it. But similarly, we're doing the similar kind of things for Sky and for TNT. And then we're working for football clubs as well. Obviously, we spoke with Nuria, Sports Pro Live, about the work we've done with Manchester City. We work across a multitude of verticals. And I think the one theme that always comes through is that the audiences want to be listened to, and they want ultimately their interactions to somehow shape the editorial narrative content.
For sure. Like, it's all kind of, I think all of these things are like really important in the modern sports era, especially like, with new fans looking for different ways to be engaged. What I'm kind of interested in is something you were saying earlier on there about how you've pivoted the business in the last couple of years. Give us a little bit of an insight into what that was like leading that kind of change. That's not easy to do, right?
No, that was really, really hard. I think I speak to a lot of people who I've known for a long time who, and it's great. Look, we take the compliments when they say, wow, the business is going great. It's great to see what you're doing. I've been in this business now for 9 years. It's not an overnight success. I think we realized that we were really, really good tech middleware and really good at connecting the dots. But we also realized that the experiences that we were telling people they needed to create for their audiences, we actually needed to show them how to do it, that we needed to be much more of a visual business. And that's where the name Dizplai comes from. It's a play on the word display, right? Because we are a visual business, but we very much now see ourselves as a media experience company, because we've got the part of the business which was originally the tech middleware, which was that interconnectivity to data sources, whether that's fan-generated content or whether that's official data sources like Opta. That's the whole we work with. We launched an agency earlier this year, and the idea behind that is that lots of people were saying to us, I understand what your technology does, but actually I need help in terms of creating a strategy around how I actually do it. And we've recently made an acquisition of a business called PitGuru that's becoming Display Gaming, which was these second screen experiences, predictions and fantasy. At the moment around sport, we're very much looking at other verticals that we can do for as well, which is that stickiness, that I like to call it the gamification of the game. We've learned a lot over the last couple of years working with Sky Sports, creating them an interactive boxing scorecard, that when you're watching the boxing, we realised that boxing fans are in WhatsApp groups with their friends, effectively scoring the fight amongst themselves anyway, because no one ever trusted the judges. And it was a conversation where with Sky, who have been a long-standing partner of ours, about like, how do we create an experience with them on social? There's no way you could do that on social and it work and hold itself together. So we created this web-based experience, which you would never know it's us. Is it better than the Sky Sports app? But Saturday fight night or Friday fight night, they'll promote it on screen. There's a QR code, you scan it, and most people have a Sky ID, certainly in the UK. So you go straight to the Sky Sports app and you can just play along. And if you don't, you have to register for a Sky ID. So it ends up being a data acquisition point for Sky as well. But effectively, you score the fight round by round, and the producers bring in what they call the viewer's verdict or the fan scorecard. We realized that we had to start to create these experiences and not rely on other third parties to do it for us that didn't think like we thought. And it was as simple as that. And I'm very lucky that our chairman and the investment group are very supportive of what we want to do. They're long-term thinkers. So it makes life slightly easier when you have that kind of support, because they're not thinking day to day, they're thinking in years terms. But in a lot of ways, yes, we had to be brave, because there's been an element of, legacy clients that perhaps weren't moving the needle for us, not staying with us because we weren't doing the things that we'd done before, but they did. It wasn't allowing us to scale by doing some of those things. We were a business that was very much ad hoc, always on a project basis, and ultimately that's not scalable, that's not investable, that's not driving shareholder value. We have to create products and services that ultimately can be replicated. We don't want everything to be cookie cutter, you know what I mean? But the basis needs to be there, that we can build on that and create then unique experiences for the people we work with.
Take us inside that journey a little bit. What was the sort of light bulb moment when you realised the business needed to change, and how did you drag not just your investors but your staff too through that?
I think I've not always been CEO in the business. I used to do sales in the business, and there'll be a lot of people listening to this, who've had that journey and you feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall because the conversion rate's relatively small. And when you start hearing the consistencies of the similar kind of things, sometimes it's what people don't say, where they're blown away by the ideas you've got, but then they just never come back. And I start to realize that they just could not visualize the thing we were telling them to do. So I think in an early part, one of the first things we did is we actually got a design team in that we didn't have before. And we just started to create visual experience, say to me, this is what we mean. And then we started to notice that would get traction. If I think back now, it's taken a while. It was a relatively slow process to do that and to learn that. But then we started to build on that. And then what's great is, look, I'm quite opportunistic. Yes, I'm strategic, but I'm not afraid to pivot. Our chairman and majority owner are exactly the same. And when I ever ask them, what is it you love about this business? It's the ability to pivot. Because I guess I can't remember the exact saying, but the definition of madness is keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And we realized, I think, that we were doing a lot of that and we needed to change. And I think I was just very, very open with the team internally as well, saying, look, we're going to go on a journey. I can't tell you right now how we're going to get there or what that's going to look like, but it'll be interesting, it'll be exciting, and you'll all have a part in it. So, for instance, when we rebranded the business and we came up with the name Dizplai and the whole look and feel and what we stood for, the whole business got involved in that. We did all of that in-house. I've got a marketing background, so I knew some things, but it was generally, we crowdfunded ideas internally about how we were going to do this and the pillars of the business and what we stand for. We realized that actually we had to make the pillars of what we stand for about the people that were in the organization already for them to buy into it.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it, I think. Also, does that sort of foster a sense of almost group ownership of the whole project? Like everyone's bought in?
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly feels like that. There is it's a job, and you've got to be no one to be creepy about it. It's not a call, right? It's a job at the end of the day, but people buy into what they're doing. And there's a culture here as well, look, make mistakes will happen. And the reality is when we we don't want to make mistakes because we've been, we missed something or we've been sloppy, something like we're happy to make mistakes because we're trying to innovate, because that's when we learn. And, we're learning on a daily basis. Someone said to me, what does a normal day look like for you? I don't really have a normal day because things change on a daily basis. And I've sort of realized over time, I think in the past I used to think to myself, does that mean I don't look like I'm focused? And I've actually realized that's probably the best part about it, that I can pivot to whatever conversation I need to pivot to. And also, I think what we tried to do in the business as well is make decision-making really clear and as fast as we possibly can, because I think I've had this in the past. Look, everyone's had good managers and bad managers, but almost like silence is a killer, right? You want to understand where you stand and what is expected of you. People need to feel like they can have input into it, but also when they need a decision, they need that decision to be made, because there's nothing worse than staying in limbo land. And we try to be fast decision makers, but also to ensure we still think things through. If that makes sense.
No, a lot. When did you sort of realize, when did it click? When did you sort of think, right, yeah, I think I've made the right decision here? Was it a particular client that you brought on, something that you launched, something that you rolled out? What was it?
Yeah, I think it's similar to when someone says, what's the favourite project you've worked on? And generally it's always the last one. There's been various milestones when we've done things where we had theories and ideas. And then when we've done them, we go, oh yeah, that worked. If I think about the stuff we did, we won an award. We won an award for when we did the social wall, when it was BT Sport back then, now TNT, for what we did for them, because Champions League Tonight as a show was nothing more than an idea from BT at first, where they said, we're going to do this magazine type show on a Wednesday night. The Champions League's finished. We've got Jake in the studio. Yes. We're thinking that we're going to try and drive it through what the viewing public want to talk about, and we're going to use those interactions to do that. Have you got any ideas? And we went away and had to think about it and create this social wall. But the beauty of it is because, look, social walls exist, like people have always seen them, was Jake as the presenter, any of that content that was loaded into that wall by the producer that had been approved, Jake could see in a companion iPad experience that we created for him as well, and he could trigger any of those questions or observations depending on where the conversation was going with the studio guests. So I looked at that but actually we've joined all the dots here together and we've delivered on a brief and actually made it easy. And then it just became its own thing then, and Jake just ran with it. We've had things like that. The boxing scorecard that I mentioned earlier that we did with Sky, where we had a theory that people would quite like to score the fight round by round, and we'd never done anything like that before. And 2 years down the line, it's still getting used on every fight night. Earlier this year, we're proud to say, probably our biggest achievement, we were chosen by Comcast to be part of the Sports Tech Accelerator. You know, we were one of 1,500 companies from around the world that applied to be part of it. We're one of 10 that got chosen. Sky been an amazing partner for us that recommended us to it. Went through 6 months of presentations and pitching and, you know, effectively proving ourselves and our model to essentially the biggest media company in the world that, you know, we will be worthy to be part of their family. And now Comcast are a minority investor in this business, which is a huge vote of confidence in what we're doing. And then most latterly, the acquisition of PitGuru, the free-to-play gaming platform, which now enables us to do so much more. A few people have said this to us, why they like working with us. Like, we think end-to-end. We think from that audience member right through to the producer and back again, and all the bits in between.
There's a lot to pick out there, isn't there? But if we can, the PitGuru acquisition is an interesting one. I mean, you mentioned you yourself have been in a startup accelerator, but yet you're acquiring other businesses. What was the thinking with that? How did that come about? And was it just a sort of, this makes sense for us at this time? Or was there something else?
It was twofold. There was a pinch point that we were trying to create those experiences ourselves, probably not being very focused on the core CMS that we've got. And the reality is, you know, resource is not infinite. And there was a personal relationship that I had with one of the founders of PitGuru that him and I were chatting just about what they were doing. And I was just lending some advice around, you know, what I would do. Because he'd seen what we'd done with the brand of Dizplai and how we were projecting ourselves. And he was similar to this. And he was asking me, how do you go about that? What are the nuts and bolts to that? And then in the interim, we'd had some discussions internally about what would it take us to build something like that. And we realized that it was a multiple of years to do it properly. So I went to our chairman and I just said, look, I think there's an opportunity here. There's a number of things that this business does now, could do in the future, that I think that will allow us to free up our current dev team to focus more on the CMS, the production product that we've got, and allow ultimately us to then integrate everything together, have a much more rounded experience, because I'm seeing that more and more of the clients that we're working with are asking for these second screen free-to-play games, let's call it that. The idea of that has been around for a long, long time, but the consumer wasn't there, the clients weren't there, and the technology wasn't there. Now it feels like we're in a sweet spot in time where actually these things are possible and people are comfortable doing with it. And I've seen some of the numbers that come out of PitGuru around some of their betting clients where they're doing free-to-play games for bookmakers, where people are doing predictions during live events, and people are coming back up to 20 times during a single live event to see where they are in the leaderboard. That regularity of coming back, and bookmakers are using it as a acquisition point to then turn them into customers, ultimately. So it ends up being a relatively small cost per acquisition to do these things.
I want to ask about the future, and then I'm going to get some kind of your personal takes on how you see leading a business. So yeah, if you could just give me a little bit of like what's coming up for Dizplai, what's next? Obviously, you said you're part of that Comcast Accelerator. What's the next big thing for you guys?
So obviously integrating in the team that we've brought in from PitGuru, they were well on with that already, and you know we're making sure that everyone has a great role within the business. They were very complimentary. It's been very easy to do, and the team have been a bit brilliant. And actually, the team that well had them in have been great as well. I very much set out what I would like, but everyone else is getting on with that, and it's great to see them all working together. From a Comcast perspective, the whole part of the Sports Tech Accelerator is ultimately to help us to grow. So there are a number of partners within that. Can't talk about who we've been partnering within it, but there are some POCs coming up that we're going to be doing with some of those partners in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And the whole idea behind the accelerators is you do POCs, they're a success, and then those potentially become paying customers. And ultimately, you know, because that is a North American-based accelerator, we're very much excited about how that helps us to grow into North America, because that's a key area that we certainly need to grow. At the moment, and interestingly, what I've said to the teams as well, because we have sort of 3 divisions within the business: solutions, creative, and gaming as we're calling it now. And I've been asked a few times by the team, because obviously it's unsettling for people. What is the plan now? Solution needs to deliver solutions, creative needs to deliver creative, and gaming needs to deliver gaming in terms of what we agreed at the start of this budget year we wanted to achieve. So if everyone does that, we're exactly where we need to be to then kick on in 2025 and beyond.
And what about with the sort of that agency element you discussed? Is that a separate pillar? Where does that fit within the business?
So the idea behind the agency is what we said is it's technology agnostic. So like we don't do everything right in display. The things we're very good at, we don't do everything. So they've got the remit that when a brief comes in from an agency or a brand, that they have to think about what the solution is to that brief, regardless of what technology is needed to do it. There are a number of technology partners that we know and love that will happily recommend, but ultimately then we go back with a full strategy about this is how we would tackle your brief and this is how we would deliver a solution for you. And then we work with internal partners, external partners to be able to do that. So we did a project for Manchester City earlier this season, which was using a third-party technology, an AR, VR filter. And there's been some really good numbers out of that. And they've got a number now of projects in the pipeline that will start to come out in the second half of the year. It's really hard starting an agency from scratch, right? And a few people said to me when I did it, why do that? Are you mad? You've not got enough work on. But we just felt like more and more of the people we were speaking to, they don't just want to buy tech. They want to buy the whole experience. They want to work with a team of people that can ultimately answer on that brief, tell them what they need, and ultimately go and deliver for them. So that's why we created that.
Sounds like a fascinating project. And yeah, for a very busy man, you do seem to be keen on taking on new tasks.
Yeah, I keep getting told that, yeah.
Just to sort of finish up, I just want to get your take on this. So firstly, what would be one piece of advice you'd give to anyone running a business that wants to lead a transformation within that business? So to take it from one place and put it in a distinctly different place.
I think be open and honest with the team around you. Obviously, look, they can't know everything because that's just the reality of these kind of things you do. But I try wherever I can to get the opinion of the wider team, whether we do internal surveys, whether we do internal sit-down meetings, group-led sessions. We're currently going through a tone of voice and messaging process that a good friend of ours externally is leading, because I felt like it was better to have someone external to do rather than myself, because I didn't want to almost sway to a certain direction. And he's decided to break that down to individual teams and bring together their thought. I think it's like try to involve them as much as you can within the idea you've got where you want to take it. Now, sometimes they will turn around to me and go, Ed, that's a crazy idea. That'll never work. You're going to have to explain that better to us. I'm not immune from that. I will take that, because if lots of people are saying to me that's crazy, I probably need to rethink it. But when most people are going, yeah, I like the idea of that. That sounds interesting. We're up for that. Okay, well, let me tell you a little bit more about it. So I think communication is key, and it's totally underrated. And I try not to do things by committee, because that's really, really hard to then make decisions. So I always try to communicate. And sometimes it's like I said, like I explained earlier, in those different ways. But, everyone knows the door's open. They want to think about things, got ideas, got concerns. We take it on board and we try and sort of filter that in then to the senior leadership. So between we can discuss it and work out if we're on the right track or if we need to be on a different track.
And finally, it's a kind of similar vein of question, but slightly different. But how do you ensure that your business is always innovating? Like, it's always thinking about the next thing. Like, what's the secret to that?
I'm very demanding, so that helps. I'm constantly seeing, and more and more the team are doing this now. I think for a long time it was mainly me, but a lot of the team here as well. I'm constantly seeing things that I just love out in the world and thinking about how do we bring something like that into what we do. And we encourage everyone else to do that as well. Yes, my job is to set a strategy and a framework in the business, but I'm not telling people how to do their jobs or how to make certain decisions on how they're going to go about things. We hire good people and we trust their judgment in terms of how we're going to go about it. But, I guess we try to hire people as well, because recruitment's important, that has a similar mindset of we don't just want to do what everyone else is doing. We want to set ourselves apart. We want to do things differently. And just because we've done something that didn't work doesn't mean if we tried it again that it wouldn't work. Maybe we just need to go about it differently.
All right. Well, Ed, best of luck. Thank you very much for your time today. Always fascinating to get insights from people leading businesses on here on the Sports Pro Podcast. So thank you very much for your time.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Okay, fellas. Thank you very much for joining me in the Sports Pro studio this week. I'm sure I will see you back in here soon enough. But for now, thank you, Josh.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Steve.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you, listeners. We will be back next week. If you haven't already, you should definitely check out our New Era podcast, latest one that came out this week, which saw my colleague Eleanor Kuyufa interview Kate Miller from the ECB, talking all about work-life balance for women in the sports industry. It's a fascinating conversation. It's not very long. It's a very nice, short and swift 20-minute listen, so perfect for your commute. Really, really implore you to go listen to that. But yeah, we will be back next week where we will be potentially handing out some 2024 half-year awards. Thanks again for listening. Cheers. Bye-bye.